This is my favorite video to do all year. Talking about and recommending film discoveries is something that keeps interesting me each year. With this year's video, I wanted to expand upon it and include even more honorable mentions, and instead of doing a top 10, I want to do a top 14, because there are just so many wonderful and fascinating films out in the world. But I didn't want to do a traditional top 14. The first 13 I will list will be in no particular order, but they still are my top of the top choices for some of the best things that I saw all year. But the number one spot is my definitive number one movie I saw all year. Now let's do the honorable mentions. All of these movies are such an amazing experience, and I would recommend these to everyone. Some of these I've already talked about, so apologies if I mentioned some of the same points again. Terror Squad. This was one of the movies that I included in my Midwest movie video. The movie was filmed in my home state of Indiana, in and around Kokomo. While this is a B movie, which is essentially The Breakfast Club meets Die Hard, this movie contains some of the best car chase filmmaking I think ever put to screen. The 20-minute car chase that takes up the middle part of this movie impressed me so much that this movie was the catalyst to the Midwest movie idea. It has stayed with me all year, and I will occasionally go back and watch the car chase sequence, and am still blown away with what they're able to do on such a small budget. I've always wanted to see a movie that really does encapsulate the feel of rural Indiana, the wide open areas that would make for some extremely effective filmmaking. I finally found a movie that does it beautifully. Who's Minding the Mint? The 60s comedy has always been a staple throughout my life, and this one I think has flown under the radar of so many people. This is a wonderfully goofy little comedy from 1967. It involves a government employee who accidentally destroys a large sum of money during work and has to gather a team together to break into the US Mint to reprint the money. This movie feels exactly like a cartoon, where each problem that the characters run into continues to build and get funnier and funnier, with the standout being Victor Bueno. Pretty Poison. I love crime films set in small towns. I think it ramps up the tension since the characters are usually trapped in the town with people closing in on them. With Pretty Poison, you have a wonderful crime thriller with Anthony Perkins at the center of it, who gives one of his best performances. His character is so different for this type of movie that the audience really flips on how they're supposed to feel for him, and the same exact thing goes for Tuesday Weld, who is just as good and complex. Throne of Blood. Kurosawa has been a huge blind spot for me. Before this year, I'd only seen Rashomon, and this is the first adaptation of Macbeth I've ever seen. And I was completely enveloped with the style of this movie. The tone and dread that is throughout this movie is perfect. The best part, though, is Toshiro Mifune's performance. I absolutely love this movie. Radioactive Dreams. This has been on my radar for a couple of years. I think the thing that kept me from it was that I knew I was going to like it just based off the premise of it mixing the post-apocalypse and film noir, and especially the music. And because I knew I was going to like it, I kept pushing it off for some reason. And what do you know? I really enjoyed this movie. Is it messy? Definitely. But I loved Pune's style of this movie so much, and it instantly made me want to check out more of his movies. U-Turn. This was a bizarre movie that kind of really worked for me. It combines some of my favorite subgenres again, small town crime and set in a limited amount of time. Oliver Stone brings his style from Natural Born Killers over to this movie, and I feel it works better with this movie. Sean Penn makes for a very good noir doomed protagonist. I feel like this movie is a perfect movie where you stumble upon it very late at night, and the style fits with that hazy nighttime feel. Shockwaves. I wanted to mention Shockwaves again because, man, did this movie really surprise me. I've already mentioned this movie in 2 other videos and wanted to mention it again here. Definitely check out this movie that feels like trying to escape a nightmare. Mirror. This is another movie that I mentioned previously, and I'm still processing it. I absolutely adored the tone of it and the feeling of traveling through what seems like memories. I would need to watch it for a second time to really start to scratch the surface of it, but since I've seen it, it has not left my memory, which is why I wanted to mention it here. The Killing of a Chinese Bookie. This is another movie where I connected to the mood and atmosphere over everything else. With Cassavetes, I feel like this is the right mindset to go into. Don't go in expecting a straight neo-noir narrative, because Cassavetes is more concerned with exploring the day-to-day life of Ben Gazzara's character, and maybe it just hit me in just the right time and mood. Killers of the Flower Moon. I was blown away by this movie. There's not a single thing that I would cut from this movie. Everything is there to build on top of each other to achieve this grand vision. For me, this is climbing the ranks of one of Scorsese's best films in his entire career, especially with the last 5 to 10 minutes. Dracula 2000. What kept me from this movie was honestly the title. I was very wrong to ignore this movie because this was an extremely fun movie to watch around October. Tons of fun vampire set pieces, and it really makes me want to check out the sequels. Night of the Werewolf. This is a film by Paul Naschy, and I've always loved seeing him in movies. My first introduction to him was The Werewolf vs. Vampire Woman when I was younger. Night of the Werewolf is more of a remake of that movie with a bigger budget, and I think it's even better. It has a great gothic atmosphere and the perfect amount of monsters for the Halloween season. Black Narcissus. This was a major movie that I finally got to check off my list. I've been slowly savoring every Powell and Pressburger film that I can see. The filmmaking alone is so incredibly ahead of its time that it still is amazing that this movie was filmed on sound stages. Terror in a Texas Town. This is a movie that I had mentioned before in a previous video also. Joseph H. Lewis's blocking is my major takeaway from this movie. He is a master at moving his camera and actors around a scene, and it makes me want to check out more of his movies. Clean Shaven. Here is a movie that has stuck with me just based off the sound design alone. It puts you into the main character's head and you stay there the entire time. Peter Green is outstanding in this. I would have loved to have seen him star in more character-driven things, but I also do love seeing him in small character actor roles. Light Sleeper. I'm trying to make my way through all of Paul Schrader's movies, and my favorite one that I saw all year was Light Sleeper. I was instantly sucked into this world, and especially the conversations that characters have, with the standout scene taking place in a hospital. Trapped. I mentioned Trapped in my Halloween video, and I wanted to mention it again here because that's how good of a discovery it was. With just a stripped down premise, this movie moves and doesn't let up. If you love Deliverance, Rituals, Hunter's Blood, or even Southern Comfort, I would strongly recommend this. Gator. This is another movie that I myself am shocked I hadn't seen yet. I had already seen White Lightning a couple years ago, and all I heard about the sequel Gator was that it wasn't as good. Quality-wise, yes, White Lightning is a way better made movie, but from an entertainment and preference, I will go for Gator any day. Horror in the High Desert. I had to mention this again. It's definitely the scariest thing I've seen all year. And the last one I wanted to mention was Trick Baby. This is essentially if you crossed The Sting with the blaxploitation genre. It's wonderful and a gritty 70s crime film that deals with two con men dealing with the mob. I don't hear a lot of people talking about this in the conversation of great 70s crime films, and this should be added to that conversation. I just cannot get enough of that genre. And now, let's get to the top 14. Number 14, Local Legends. Out of all the movies I saw all year, this is the movie that has given me the biggest inspiration, not only in film, but just creativity in general. I can't accurately explain why, but the determination and love that Matt Farley and Charlie Roxburgh have in making movies is so infectious that it influences me to be creative in any way that I can. It was kind of a journey to get to this movie. I originally found out about who Matt Farley and Charlie Roxburgh were through a podcast called The Important Cinema Club by Justin Decloux and Will Sloan. I eventually bought probably their most well-known movie, Don't Let the River Beast Get You, through Justin Decloux's excellent boutique Blu-ray label Gold Ninja Video. With that movie, you yourself go on a journey when viewing it. At first you think it's a bad movie, but as you get into the movie, you begin to realize how smart the movie is and how precise Matt Farley and Charlie Roxburgh are in what they're doing with this film and every film they make. From there, I watched Freaky Farley, and then I finally came to Local Legends, which is essentially an autobiography about Matt Farley, his songwriting career, and how he and his friend Charlie Roxburgh make movies. This is the movie that made everything click into place when it comes to their whole world. And I can't express enough how inspiring this movie is and how real it feels.
The lonely engine puffing steam and everybody has a dream. Baby, 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 can I be in yours?
Number 13, Bad Lieutenant. This year I really started to deep dive into Abel Ferrara and into the deep, grimy world that he's built throughout his entire filmography. Coming out of all of the movies that I've seen from him, Bad Lieutenant was the one that affected me the most. I think this is his masterpiece and one of the best character studies of the 90s. It goes without saying that this is Harvey Keitel's greatest performance. He is asked to do so much in this movie, and it is a performance that is absolutely fearless. He gives it everything he has, and even the guerrilla-style filmmaking that Ferrara does is so captivating and lived in. Multiple times you can see bystanders watching the acts that Keitel's character does, and they just stand there and watch, or just walk away, which in turn brings on this documentary realism to it. I give Keitel all the props in the world for portraying a character who is one of the most disgusting and grimiest characters I've ever seen in a movie. Just for the record, I saw the uncut version, which includes some key scenes that truly make this character, just like in the title, bad and especially disgusting.
That's him. It's him. Arrest him.
How much do they
Arrest
take?
him.
How much do they take?
$500.
Number 12, Working Girls. Here's a movie that I had never heard of before. This is the movie from 1986 directed by Lizzie Borden, not the movie Working Girl from 1988 by Mike Nichols. Borden is able to balance so much with this movie, from a simple premise where we follow a day in the working life of a high-class escort in New York. The whole movie is contained to this one apartment where she and her other co-worker escorts all meet their clients, and the whole movie plays out like it's a typical day of work. The way that Borden and Sandra Kay write these characters makes you instantly engaged and completely lays out their relationships towards each other and especially their working relationships with their clients. Every actor in this commits fully, and I know I used this term previously, but it especially applies here. Every actor in this movie is fearless. They give 100% of themselves over to Borden's vision, and it all comes together to create a powerful piece of filmmaking. This movie really makes me want to dive deeper into more of Borden's movies, and especially her career as a whole.
Look at me. The two things I love most in life are sex and money. It's just that I didn't know until much later that they were connected.
Guess what, Molly? He wants to see you too.
I like to be the center of attention.
Number 11, Baxter. When I heard the premise of this movie, I knew I needed to find a way to see it. The entire movie is told from the point of view of a bull terrier, but the hook is that the dog is essentially a sociopath. And we, the audience, hear what Baxter is thinking in this wonderfully sinister narrator voice. The entire movie spans 3 different families that adopt Baxter: an elderly woman, then a newlywed couple with a baby on the way, and finally a young kid who is also a sociopath. All these interconnect with each other, and the entire movie is so affecting in what it sets out to do. The voice acting and dog acting are some of the best I've ever seen. There is something about this combination of seeing this adorable dog but hearing the most disturbing things coming from him that is a wonderful juxtaposition. It even taps into the realm of the Kuleshov effect, where we the audience begin to impose our own meaning on the face of the dog. It is some of the coolest and most innovative filmmaking I've seen all year, and I just cannot get enough of saying Baxter.
Baxter. Méfiez-vous du chien qui pense.
Number 10. Cast a Deadly Spell. Here is a movie I had only heard about in passing. Upon looking into it, I was surprised to see it was directed by Martin Campbell and that it was a TV movie. And the really interesting thing is that it had never really gotten a proper home video release, but it can be found in HD on HBO Max, which is where I watched it. For some reason, before checking it out, I didn't really think much about it at first. It seemed intriguing and has two of my favorite character actors in it, Fred Ward and Clancy Brown. And then I decided to program it for my yearly Halloween marathon and was completely blown away by every aspect of this movie. Not only from the scale of the movie, the world building, the practical creature effects, but especially the performance by Fred Ward and his character. This almost seems like the role he was born to play. A classic noir detective in a world where everyone uses magic except him. You are instantly compelled by him and immediately ask why he doesn't use magic. And that question just keeps building and getting deeper as the movie goes along. This is a perfect Halloween movie. And it's surprisingly pretty gruesome in parts, especially for being a TV movie. I have not stopped thinking about this movie, or even the fact that once you see this movie, you will finally be able to know what happens to a person when they're caught in a paper tornado.
What about Olivia?
Number 9. Crimes of Passion. Here's a movie that has all the grime and grit of any great 70s and 80s movie, and all of it is coming from the mind and talent of Ken Russell. The only other Russell movie that I've seen is Lara the White Worm. I definitely know of Russell and what a style is, but I was not prepared for the style explosion that is Crimes of Passion. Every performance in this movie, I think, is some of the best performances of the entire 80s. John Lawlin, who is more or less our main character, and I could see some people not vibing with this performance, but for me, it was perfect for this movie. Not only for what the movie needed, but his character. His character puts up this front throughout the first half of the movie, but once a key and I think best scene happens where him and his wife are in bed talking with each other, his whole character in front that he's been putting up just completely breaks down before our eyes. Then you have him sandwiched in between the true stars of the movie. Kathleen Turner, who I had no idea had this type of performance in her, and Anthony Perkins, who I still think should have been nominated for an Oscar for this role. All of these characters come in and out of each other's stories, and it all culminates with an incredible reveal for Perkins' character, and honestly, one of the best homages I've ever seen in a movie.
What you got here, the Holy Grail? Come on. Oh my God. Oh, excuse me. Oh God.
Need I remind you, Jezebel, that curiosity killed the cat?
Number 8. Evil Dead Trap. This movie was one of the biggest surprises of the entire year. I remember hearing the title a while back, and anyone's first instinct is asking if it's an Evil Dead knockoff or an official sequel in the vein of Zombie to Dawn of the Dead. That's exactly what I thought, but I finally decided to give it a try, and it was not what I expected at all. This movie has so much visual style to it, from the set all the way to the music, which is used amazingly throughout. This movie feels like an old school survival horror game from the late 90s to the early 2000s. Every environment that the characters wander through is dripping with atmosphere, fog, and water. And I thought that this was genuinely an unsettling movie. For most of its runtime, I was having a good time with it. But then the last 15 minutes happened. Something that was so out of left field and bonkers that I completely fell in love with this movie. And this is something that I could not stop talking about afterwards. If you're the least bit intrigued, don't read anything about it because I feel it gives away way too much for those last 15 minutes. This is one of those wonderful viewing experiences that I will never forget. Number 7. The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. Out of all the movies that I saw this year, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg is the one that emotionally moved me so much. What surprises me even more is the fact that out of all the genres of movies, musicals have been my biggest blind spot. Some of my favorites being Little Shop of Horrors, Singing in the Rain, and all that jazz. But the surprising thing is that when this initially started, I was kind of put off of it. The whole concept of this movie is that every line of dialogue is sung by the actors, and I thought, oh no, am I really not going to gel with this? But I was extremely wrong, because I fell into this movie so fast after that. Not only is the music so fresh and modern, the direction by Jacques Demy is some of the greatest musical filmmaking I've ever seen. I feel like a lot of the modern musical tropes all stem from this movie. At the heart of all of this, you have an extremely emotional and crushing love story. So much is conveyed throughout the use of music and images. The one that has stuck with me is a particular wedding sequence. If you've seen the movie, then you know how devastating this cut to the wedding is. What first starts out as organ music that would typically be in a wedding turns extremely foreboding and almost like funeral music. This scene in the entire movie has stuck with me throughout the entire year. Number 6, The Seventh Curse. One of the best movie watching experiences ever was The Seventh Curse. A movie that is so continuously switching genres between scenes and is able to balance all of them. There are moments in this movie that are so crazy and out there that they are over before you even have a chance to process what just happened. And the even more impressive part is all the effects are very well done and all contribute to help set the tone as the genre begins to change between the scenes. And I do think that Chow Yun-fat has the best moment of the entire movie towards the end. Lam Nai Chow also directed Riki-Oh, The Story of Ricky, which I'd seen a number of years ago and was also blown away by that movie. This one may even top Riki-Oh. It makes me so excited to check out more of his movies. I do have a VHS copy of one of his other movies called The Ghost Snatchers that I'm really eager to see. If you want a fun, crazy, entertaining Hong Kong action, horror, and adventure movie, check out The Seventh Curse. Number 5, Lone Wolf and Cub, Sword of Vengeance. To explain how amazing this movie was would not even do it justice. I had known about these series of films for a long time, especially the trope of the loner for hire protecting a baby or a young kid through a harsh environment. This is the gold standard when it comes to that idea. The character of Ogami Ito is so fascinating right from the get-go because we're introduced to him doing something extremely brutal, but the look on his face is what leads the audience into thinking, what is this man truly thinking? This is one of those series of movies where I want to savor every entry in it, especially after the final 20 minutes of this movie where Ito is basically unleashed on all the bad guys. And my gosh, is it wonderful and super, super gory. But this finale and the violence that he deals has a major purpose and is set up when he lets his son choose two paths. Either to follow him through this harsh land where violent acts are everywhere, or to be with his mother. Or in other words, kill him so he can be with his mother in the afterlife. This, to me, is the key scene and what sets up the rest of the tone, violent acts, and seeing what the world that the kid has chosen to travel through has in it. Number 4, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This movie completely blew me away with how ahead of its time it feels. Ruben Mamoulian does things in this movie with the camera that gives me a headache just trying to think of the planning and the time that had to go into everything. From communicating to the actors on hitting their exact marks, having the camera come in and out of focus and go into these impressive oneers, and even communicating to the lighting and makeup department for one of the best transformations ever in the history of movies. The fact that he was able to achieve the grand transformation sequence in one shot just by using a combination of lighting and makeup is just a pure cinema moment. That is one of the best sequences ever put to film. And even on top of all these impressive elements, you have the Jekyll and Hyde performance by Frederick March. The back and forth scenes between him and Miriam Hopkins is so tense that you just cannot take your eyes off the screen. There's a particular scene where we're focusing on Hopkins' character in the foreground. Based on the previous scene, we the audience know that Hyde is looking for her, and if he finds her, it will not be good. As Hopkins is sitting in the foreground, the door to her apartment is stationed in the background for a solid couple of minutes, and it is one of the most tense scenes because you are just fixated on that door and just waiting for him to open it. Whether or not he does, you just have to find out. Number 3, Body Double. This year, I finally watched Body Double. I do understand that I've heard some people say that this movie had a lot of potential and could have honestly been even darker than what it is. But for me, I think it works masterfully. The tone and atmosphere is something that completely gelled with me. I think it's a combination of the location, the setting being this unique looking house in the Hollywood Hills, the music, the surreal relaxed sequence, the sequence involving the drill, the killer, and his victim, the rear window homage, and all of this combined together into a movie that I could just not get enough of. Even recording this voiceover for this segment, it just makes me want to rewatch this movie. And I feel that this is a movie that will work for people if you allow it to. If you settle into the mood of it and the logic of it, then I think people will have a beautiful experience delving into this very seedy world that the movie creates.
Oh my God.
Number 2, Arsenic and Old Lace. This movie has eluded me for years. In fact, the whole wave of old Hollywood screwball comedies is a wave that I've still been dipping my toes into. But for me, this is the one where the formula of manic comedy from the 40s really clicked with me. I adored this movie on every single level. Every joke builds on another, and all of it because of Cary Grant's performance. For the most part, I was actually never really a huge fan of him up to this point. North by Northwest, Charade, The Philadelphia Story, and even His Girl Friday, I always kind of thought he was the weakest actor out of the entire bunch in each one of those movies, but I will go back on what I thought after seeing him in this movie. He gives one of the most committed comedic performances I've ever seen, as well as one of the most physical comedic performances. With his performance, it reminded me so much of Bruce Campbell that I would be so curious to see if Cary Grant was an inspiration for Campbell's performance in the Evil Dead films. Surrounding Cary Grant are also equally amazing performances, particularly Peter Lorre and Raymond Massey. Like I've said countless times before, this movie delves into my favorite subgenre, the all-in-one night movie. While you can tell that this movie is based off of a play, the performance and the blocking by Frank Capra really propel it past those play trappings. This makes me so excited for the further rabbit hole down the 1940s comedies. And to me, if a movie makes you excited to view even more movies, that is a wonderful feeling.
Well, look, darling. Look, I'm frightfully sorry, but I've got an awful shock for you. Ted has killed a man, darlings.
Nonsense.
But there's a body in the window seat.
Yes, dear. We know.
And my definitive number 1 favorite movie I saw all year is High and Low. No movie this year has made me fall back in love with filmmaking more than high and low. Everything I have to say about this movie has probably already been said hundreds of times by different people, but there is a reason for that, because it is that much of a masterpiece. The blocking that Kurosawa uses throughout this movie is unlike anything I have ever seen in my life. It's mind-blowing to think about, and even more so when you factor in that every actor on screen, every single one of them, is giving the best performance. Mifune's performance, and especially character arc, is one of the best I've ever seen or read. You start out really disliking his character, but by the end, he completely turns his character and his life around, and it is masterful how Kurosawa is able to pull this off. And that goes for the entire movie. What starts out as an isolated thriller shifts gears into a procedural, and it's enthralling throughout. Never once was I bored or thought a scene should be cut. It makes me extremely excited to see more of Kurosawa's work. He has been one of my major blind spots, but my gosh, when you make something this amazing, you really have to slow down and savor every piece of work that they have to their name.
でもそれができんのだ。お前は何も知らん。だから私は行きますよ。いいですね。
待って。起きなさい。さあ起きて。大丈夫よ。今度はしんちゃんを見殺しにするようなことはしない。
And that's my list for 2023. I would love to hear about everyone else's favorite first-time watch experiences, especially why they love them. All right, see you later.